Welcome back to the Under Construction podcast, where we talk with the leaders behind the built environment. Today, we're joined by Katy Sheesley with over 35 years in the construction and real estate industry. She has managed multi-million-dollar projects, held director of business development roles with well-respected general contractors, such as Hoar Construction and R.C. Matthews in Tennessee, whilst also being a pioneer for women in construction, chairing multiple committees and boards. So, Katy, let's get started. It's a pleasure to have you on. How are you today?
I'm great. Thank you for having me.
Amazing. Good. So I'd like to really start, kind of just head back to the start of your career and really understand from you, what influenced your decision ultimately to get into the construction industry.
So what influenced me was a dad and a brother who were both mechanical engineers. So engineering was not so far-fetched, and I went into engineering at Vanderbilt University. And then after learning, graduating from civil engineering, construction was much more interesting to me than actually civil engineering and being at the drafting table.
Amazing. And what was kind of your first real sort of role in the industry? Would you describe it as?
Well, and that's interesting. My first role was assistant project manager, and I had that role for a number of years. And I really started out as a project manager, though, even though my title was assistant project manager. I was managing projects on my own from the get-go.
Amazing. Wow, kind of jump straight in.
Sink or swim.
Yeah, absolutely, right. And what sort of point then did you find yourself really feeling confident in what you were doing in that kind of environment?
It was probably several years and several different projects. I was really fortunate to have a company, Pinkerton and Laws in Atlanta, Georgia, who put me with very experienced and senior superintendents. Mm-hmm. And they were not at all, bothered by working with a woman, and were great about teaching me, educating me, showing me what was what in the field on the construction site. And so just with time, I felt more confident.
Yeah, I think, and especially, you were, I'm sure, lucky, some would maybe say, to be in that environment where you were kind of just treated as equal, and kind of taught the ropes, if you will. Is there any other things that you would say kind of really helped you build on that confidence early on, especially in an environment, like you mentioned, where, you might have been a minority, being a woman in the industry?
Having two older brothers, I was experienced with working with a lot of males. So that was helpful. And I'm not sure what else. I don't know.
Yeah, I think, being around that environment anyway, like you mentioned, in home life is, I'm sure, kind of sets you up for that sort of environment in work and professional life as well, which is great. And then so sort of fast forwarding more to today, what does your current or most recent sort of role look like?
Well, I finished at the top of my game so far as my full-time career. I was managing some of the largest projects, or involved with some of the largest projects here in Nashville. A soccer stadium, it was $325 million. And the first year of the Titan Stadium, which was $2 billion. And thoroughly enjoyed those projects and working on them. It was just tremendous. So I retired 1 year ago. And since then, I've been working on projects that I enjoy with the people I enjoy working with. And so that's been ideal.
Yeah, amazing. And I think, it's a great thing to be able to retire at a time, or kind of take a bit of a step away when, you feel the top of your game. You feel like you've got that experience. You've worked on some once in a lifetime for sure projects. Building. Amazing. And what really led you to join GHP, your recent company? What was it like sort of working there?
And it was a great company to work for. And I learned a lot from GHP because prior to GHP, I had only worked for General Contractors. So I knew a lot about construction. And GHP was an architectural, environmental, and construction services firm. So once I got there, I learned a tremendous amount about architecture and, environmental issues with buildings. So it's always great to keep learning.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that, moving and transitioning from general contracting to more of that kind of, diverse practice, it's super, I imagine it was challenging as well.
Yes,
what did you kind of enjoy most about that role? And also what did you find challenging in that transition? Because it's quite it's a transition that you see quite a lot in the industry, moving from general contractor to a different kind of type of organization.
Well, fortunately, I was still involved with construction. So that part I was familiar with and knew very well what I was doing. The architectural side was just fascinating. I mean, of course, I'd always worked with plans and architects and engineers, and they were part of every project that I worked on. But to see actually what they do on a daily basis and work more hand in hand with them was a great experience. And then environmentally, here was a great example. A tower had been painted in Nashville, and they wanted to revive the tower. Mm-hmm. So a contractor started sandblasting the tower without checking first if it was lead-based paint.
Oh, wow.
And we're talking about a big tower, so lead-based paint was getting airborne all over the place. So they called us to handle that, to figure out what to do. And the vice president over environmental said to me, "I can't believe this project manager didn't know, not to check for lead first." And I said, "Don, I've been in construction for 30 years. I didn't know to check for lead-based paint first." Because as a contractor, you don't learn as much about environmental. Mm-hmm. So that was an interesting story too.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, it kind of highlights as well that, you could be an expert in your industry, in construction, and there's still, as you mentioned, 30 years down the line, you weren't aware of that either. So, it kind of a great lesson for our younger generation as well. If they do make a mistake, or, there's something that, they're kind of beating themselves up about, it is what, you can be in the industry for many, many years and still, not know that information. So definitely a great lesson to kind of resonate with some of the younger listeners. And so, kind of talking through your career journey as well, did you really plan your career path, or did it just sort of evolve over time?
It evolved over time. And looking back, I wish that I had planned my career more. I began working with a career coach probably 10 or 15 years ago, and it made a tremendous difference in my career, in my compensation. That was a great thing. And so I did not plan it and wish I had.
Again, which is great advice, I think, for, some of those younger listeners who are, at a point in their career, maybe where they're thinking, I'm not really sure where I'm taking this. I love what I do, but I really want to have kind of a plan and action that. So, again, some great advice. What would you say, were there any sort of key moments or moves in your career that did really sort of feel like they pushed your career forward?
Well, each time I changed firms, that's a big change. You have to learn the company, you have to learn how they do things, you have to learn who's who and who's responsible for what, and how do I maneuver in this environment. It's very challenging to change jobs, but for me, especially being a woman in construction, I to move up in my career, it seemed that I had to change jobs to really move up with title and with compensation.
Yeah, and I think that's a really interesting point you touch on. There may be other women out there who are sort of feeling in that boat of, well, I'm not really sure how I'm going to progress and things like that. And, having those discussions, seeing what else is out there, it's a shame that is the case in some instances, but equally, sometimes you've got to make that jump and kind of, as you say, see how it goes. And that was going to be another sort of question that I was going to mention is, did you ever have to take a step sideways or backwards to move forward? It's not as simple as always taking a forward step.
No, yes, I absolutely, not only did I take it sideways, I took it backwards. I'm quite outspoken and opinionated. And I was working on a project where my job was reading all the information and knowing what we needed to do next. And my boss's job was, I guess, listening to me and then communicating with the client. And he kept stating things differently from what I'd been reading and what I knew. And I got upset about that and was not good about sharing that information with my boss. And I went from having an office and whatever else to being at a cubicle. So, yes, you need to know when to share whatever information you need to share and how to share it.
Yeah, absolutely.
You could have some significant consequences.
Yeah, no, of course. And I think that that's, something that's super important, especially, potentially being a minority and being a woman in construction, is to kind of make sure that you do speak up when you want to and when you're passionate about something. And, we might call it outspoken, but it also could be called passion, right? Was that one of the things then you would say that really helped you stand out and helped you progress?
Oh, sure. I mean, sometimes learning things the hard way, you don't forget them. But I think most importantly, you still want to speak out. It's just how and when you speak out. And just as we've all heard, don't ever send an email when you're angry. It's the same thing. Don't ever have an important conversation with your boss when you're angry.
Yeah, absolutely. Emotions are running high.
For that matter, anyone you're trying to work with. Yeah.
Absolutely. And, were there any sort of habits or approaches you feel kind of helped with that, but also helped give you kind of an edge when you were moving through your career?
Gosh, not that come to mind.
Yeah, no, I think you mentioned one there, about kind of really just making sure that you're composing yourself before, going into some of those conversations is a massive, approach that, especially when you're young and you're growing through a career, it's something that, is super important to make sure, to help you progress as well. So
it's important to know how to get along well with others. You need to develop relationships both internally and with your clients, but not just with your clients. It's really important how you get along with everyone in your firm and well, really not only your clients, but all the different team members you're working with.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that, I was going to say, how much of your progression do you think really does come down to that environment, that culture, and the people around you?
Oh, that's absolutely a large part of it. But in terms of moving forward in your career, I learned that business development, being able to bring in work for the firm you're working for and bring in new projects is equally important, if not more important, than how well you manage projects or, do the job. Because every firm needs to bring in more business. It's what keeps the lights on. And if you're helping with that, then you're more valuable to the company.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. And is there any tips that you would give folks who are maybe wanting to do that or wanting to branch into that, business development side of things a little bit more? Obviously, you have, decades of experience in that.
Yeah, I learned from others, absolutely. And then I read books on business development, on sales, on marketing. I went to conferences. It's just pushing yourself to grow and learn business development and, talking to others who are in business development and asking them, what do they do? We had a great presentation. It was just a PowerPoint presentation about helping others in the firm with business development. And one of them was as simple as, when you go into a room, and all of us are a little bit, what do I do now? When you walk into this huge room and you're not sure what to do, but you're there for business development. So the most important thing is walk all the way across the room like you see someone you're going to talk to, whether you do or not. And then see where are any potential clients. And that's who you want to go back and talk with, because you're not there to talk to friends.
Yeah, absolutely.
You're there to try to bring in potential work. So it's just learning all the way along.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and being curious, by the sounds of it, is something that really helped you, pushing yourself out of your comfort zone as well. Will kind of, talking to familiar faces, but, talking to new faces is kind of the main way for that, of course, like you mentioned. And, with that in mind, was there a moment or a period that did really sort of test you? And what did you learn from that?
Oh, goodness. I think I was tested all the way along in my career. I don't know. I don't have one thing that's coming to mind.
No, and I think that's, again, I think that's super raw and honest that it's constantly testing. There's always things that will crop up, especially in construction, sort of day to day, things that, in the moment you just sort of have to react to. So I think that'll probably give a lot of others comfort in the fact that, it's not just one thing, there's a lot of things.
Yes, you're tested all the way along. And when you are, just ask questions. I mean, that was one thing I did not hesitate to ask questions, to learn from others, to not be concerned about knowing it all. None of us can know it all. There's so much to know.
Absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
No, absolutely. And, was there a sort of a piece of advice or a mentor that did have a sort of lasting impact on you?
Absolutely. Jennifer Way was my career coach, and she was just tremendous in helping me better plan my career, learn how to, with each review, when your annual review with whoever you're reporting to, it's really the same thing as an interview with a new company, because this is a decision about whether or not you're going to be paid more or how much of a bonus you're going to receive, what the next year might look like for you. So it's really important to know how to handle the review. And I would literally work with my career coach on what might be asked and how I would respond. I mean, physically practicing out loud what I would say. And I will tell you that in practicing that with my career coach, I had my raise. So this is not a bonus. This is a raise that went from 5% to 20% because of what I had practiced with Jennifer and how I responded to questions.
Wow, absolutely. I mean,
in your salary and what you're paid every single month. So absolutely. I highly recommend a career coach.
Yeah. And I think just, being prepared going into those conversations as well. I frequently speak with, prospect candidates or individuals, and they say to me, I've got a review coming up and I'm not sure whether to see what's out there, and I, in that situation, as opposed to, being, trying to find somebody a new role, I really like to kind of help them through that. And, how could you maybe improve your current position as well? And,
yes.
Are you prepared going into that conversation? So, I think obviously it happens every year, but it's super important that, you're going into that and you know how to navigate that type of discussion as well. Is there anything then looking back, that you wish you knew earlier?
Yes, I wish I'd known to hire a career coach very early in my career. And it's expensive, but if it makes that sort of difference in your compensation, which it absolutely can, then it's worth every penny. And it's definitely worth your time, because I learned a lot about managing relationships within the company I worked for, managing relationships up the line, people I reported to, managing relationships with people who reported to me. It was just invaluable.
Yeah, absolutely. As you say, it kind of positively affect lots of different relationships, communications that you have on a daily basis. Amazing. Yeah. Amazing. And obviously talking about, the sort of communications with others, what was kind of your first experience really managing or leading people?
That's a great question, because it really was from the get-go. As a project manager, even as an assistant project manager, you have superintendents reporting to you. You have all your subcontractors, not necessarily reporting to you, but you're managing them. So I was managing people right off the bat and have been managing people ever since.
And during that, kind of evolution of you managing people, as you said, kind of thrown in at the deep end early on, but were there any skills that over time you did kind of, adopt or understand further that developed that really helped you with that kind of management of people and communication?
Just relationships, just developing relationships, caring about people. Just being legitimately interested in the people you're working with, whether they report to you or someone you report to, and caring. I've always cared about the people I work with, but just because of who I am and what I've been through, I'm especially mentoring women and want to bring them along as much as possible.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's something that, everyone can probably take into their day-to-day lives, just genuinely caring and showing an interest in people, especially when you're working with people, is super, super important. And then moving on to maybe a bit of advice for others, what do senior leaders really look for when, promoting somebody?
Because of course it's table stakes that you do your job well.
Mm-hmm.
So you need to be able to do your job well, and that you're working hard, but also, once again, that you get along well with others, that the client enjoys working with you, that others in your firm enjoy working with you, that you can handle the tests that come along, you can handle conflict when it is there, because there's certainly plenty of conflict, and that you're honest and have integrity. I don't see how any project moves forward well if people aren't honest with one another.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think that's super important. And is there any advice in particular that you would give to, young women considering or entering into a career in construction?
Well, yes. I once again, I'm saying this a lot, but it is important. Early on, I would hire a career coach. They, know where you want to go. One of the things I've learned as I've, been in business for so long, I would love to be on a corporate board. I have served on a corporate board. I would love to serve on another corporate board and several. But you need to be thinking about that very early in your career. That you want it, that if that's something you want to do, serve on a corporate board, there are things you need to do to get there. And so,
And what sort of
things is so important?
Yeah, absolutely. And are there any sort of things in particular that you think, if folks are, knowing that later in their career they might want to be on corporate boards, is there anything you would say to them, start doing this now?
Oh, yes. It's the same as business development. Read about it, ask others about it, learn what you need to do, because there are a whole lot of steps to even consider, the opportunity to be on a corporate board. You have a corporate board resume. It's totally different from, a work resume or that type of thing. So it's learning what it takes to get to that level.
Yeah, absolutely. And start, as early on as possible if you've identified it's something.
And, find out other women in your community who do serve on a corporate board, because that's what I learned here. And we had a group that even worked on helping other women get on corporate boards. Wow. So if you know some of the high profile women in your community, see which ones are serving on a corporate board and ask them, how'd you get there? Do you have any suggestions for me? What could I learn here? It's asking and learning.
Absolutely. I think, that constant theme of just being curious is something that's super important. And it's easy to kind of lose when you're, juggling things in a day-to-day job and stuff like that. So no, I think that's important. And, is there anything that you wish more women really realized about their own potential?
Yes, that if you're doing a good job and you're showing up every day, you're valuable to your company. I think so many people, or I should just say for myself, I would have been able to negotiate better opportunities with the firms I was already working with if I'd had an awareness of how valuable I was there. And maybe if I'd had a career coach to help me navigate that, it wouldn't have been necessary to change jobs as much as I did.
Sure. Yeah. So just recognizing your potential kind of in the moment, because it's easily can get, lost or caught up. And, obviously you're mentioning in hindsight now, the value you were adding, but maybe in the moment it's easy to not kind of, understand that from that perspective.
Well, and just recognizing your own value, knowing the value that you have for the firm you're presently working for. I don't think I knew well enough the value I was bringing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's great. Really want people to go away and kind of think about that and think about the value that they're adding, like you mentioned.
How valuable they already are, where they are. Because if you don't know yourself, how much value you're adding to the company, why is anyone else going to recognize it?
Absolutely. No, it's a great lesson for sure. And, with that being said, then the industry kind of today and for the future, what do you think the industry needs to do to attract more women?
It starts so early on.
Mm-hmm.
I've been involved with the ACE mentoring program, architecture, construction, engineering. It's a mentoring program for, men and women in high school to introduce them to all these opportunities. And so I think you have to start so early to assist in bringing more women into the business, letting them know about the opportunities and what's there for them in high school, in college, and as early as possible.
Absolutely. Yeah. And just showing, that it's possible, showing that there's a career in it, as you say. What is there anything as well that kind of gives you optimism about where the industry might be heading?
Well, sure. I think with BIM and AI and the technology, we're finally making some good progress in construction, and I hope that just continues.
Amazing. Absolutely. And then, maybe aside from kind of the corporate professional world, what would you say as well helps you switch off? I know a lot of listeners, I'm sure, can get very caught up in, a full-time day job, anything that kind of gets you when you're busy, helps you kind of relax, switch off.
Sure. Just reading a good book, listening to a great podcast, walking in my neighborhood or in the park. We have a multi-thousand-acre park literally across the highway from where we live. So that's really nice.
Yeah, that's nice. Fresh air and a good book. Have you got any recommendations for books, podcasts, shows that you think folks might be interested in?
Not necessarily for the business world, but one of the best books I've read is Boys in the Boat. And the ending, but it's still just a great read.
Amazing. Good. Well, look, thank you so much, Katy. I'm sure that the listeners will love hearing your story. If everyone could subscribe, and we'll see you on the next episode. Thanks again.
Thank you for the opportunity, Olivia.